I am happy to be here for our lecture by Ellen Bravo. This is the culminating event of the One Book, One Campus Dialogues in Social Justice program. For those of you that may not be familiar with that program, it's an annual, year-long effort to encourage faculty, staff, and students to read a book on a social justice issue, and we have selected Ellen Bravo's book this year. Want to give you a little bit of a year in review with that program. I'm happy to report because of so many people taking interest in wanting to make our campus more inclusive and to have some self-exploration around these issues. We have had campus ministers discuss this book. We have had faculty come together and discuss this book through the PEAT initiative. We have had several classes to take on the book, such as Narai Grove's core class, which is about 60 people. I'm aware that Dr. Tanya Wharton's class is in the house, and they've been reading chapters of the book. Gil Hickman's Leadership and Development Society course is reading parts of the book. Crystal Holt's Women in Leadership course, as well as some Will seminars. We have had Richmond College Dean's offices provide residence, assistants, and service training for the men on our campus. We have had Multicultural Student Union provide a session. We've had close to, well, over 150 people attend sessions that were open to the entire campus. So just among the people that I am able to count, we have had over 300 people involved in this program. And that's only the people I can count. I often come across people who have said, I picked up the book, or my class is using the book, and I never knew anything about it. So I want to, first of all, acknowledge everyone in the house that has read the book or come to a discussion. I thank you for being involved and for helping us to become a richer community. At this point, we will have an introduction of Ellen Bravo, and it is going to be provided by Michael Rogers, who was a constant One Book discussion attendee in the fall, so much so I invited him to be a facilitator. He is a first-year student from Texas with an interest in urban development.
I didn't realize I was getting my own introduction, but thank you. Some of you already know about Ellen Bravo, but I get to share a few of her many contributions over the years. She's a longtime activist for social change, of course. In 1982, she began working for 9 to 5, the National Association of Working Women. And after she helped found the Milwaukee chapter, Ms. Bravo led until 2004 as the national director. And she still serves as consultant for 9 to 5. Now, Ellen teaches women's studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, including master's level classes on family-friendly workplaces and sexual harassment. She coordinates the Multi-State Working Families Consortium, a network of state coalitions working for family-flexible policies. In addition to her book, Taking on the Big Boys, Ellen co-authored with Ellen Cassidy the 9 to 5 Guide to Combating Sexual Harassment and wrote The Job Family Challenge, a 9 to 5 guide, not for women only. She's also written numerous articles and reports and is frequently interviewed by the media as a leading spokeswoman for working women's issues. Ellen has served on several state and federal commissions, including the Bipartisan Commission on Leave, studying the impact of the Family and Medical Leave Act. She co-chaired the Economic Sufficiency Task Force of the Wisconsin Women Equals Prosperity Project, led by Lieutenant Governor Barbara Lawton, and serves as treasurer for the campaign of Congresswoman Gwendolyn Moore. She is a member of several boards and committees, including the Working for Good Jobs in America Fund, the Work-Life Law Advisory Committee, the Miss Foundation for Women Advisory Committee, and the Grants Advisory Committee of the Milwaukee Women's Fund. Among her commendations is a Women of Vision Award from the Miss Foundation. Ellen lives in Milwaukee with her husband. They have 2 sons. In our brief conversation earlier, Ms. Bravo always managed to point out the larger structures that have been our way of thinking about gender equality in America, and I'm sure she'll continue to question the status quo. Please help me welcome Ms. Ellen Bravo.
So this is so great. This is the first time I've ever had a chance to spend 2 days and talk to a bunch of different people about the book, and what I wish is that I could just interview all of you. I'm so curious about your reactions to the book, your thoughts about your lives, so I'm going to leave, I hope, plenty of time for conversation. And I want to say that at 8:30 tonight, there's a Take Back the Night march that I also want to make sure that we have finished so that people can participate in that. I've been up since 4:30, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be staying awake, but I really commend you for doing this, and I appreciate it. So let me just give you a little overview for those of you who haven't read the book, just kind of big picture. I started the book with a story about really one of the reasons I wrote it. So I had been on this interview show in Milwaukee, and the next day, my husband, whose name is Larry Miller, went to buy a bike. And the guy at the bike shop noticed both our names on the check. And he said to Larry, "Do you live with her?" And Larry said, "Well, she's my wife." And the guy kind of leaned in confidentially and said, "You want to know something amazing? I saw her on that show last night, and she didn't say one thing I disagreed with, and she even made me laugh." And Larry's thinking, what did you think she was going to say? And he almost started a conversation with the guy, but he actually knew what the guy thought I was going to say, and plus he really wanted to just go home and ride his new bike. And this is what the guy thought I was going to say, and maybe what some of the people you know think people like us are going to say, which is, "Down with men, all men are pigs, any woman who stays home with children is wasting her life." And of course, that's not what I said at all. I talked about how much families, and women and men, are hurt by workplaces where family values end at the workplace door. And I talked about the fact that, yeah, men do have a lot of changing to do, but they have so much more to gain than they have to lose from being part of this feminist movement. And what do you know, I even had a sense of humor. And I thought, I'm going to start the book like that, because I want people to realize how reasonable and fair and amusing I am. And then the more I thought about it, the more I got pissed off, if you pardon the expression. Because here's the facts. Women in this room are going to lose $500,000 to $2 million over your lifetime because of pay inequity. And when you lose that money, so will your husbands and so will your sons. We have a situation in the United States of America where Brazil, Cameroon, India, and 160 other countries do better than we do when it comes to paid leave. We have a decline in the number of female executives and an increase in the number of kids living in poverty. And somehow feminists are the cause of all this. I don't get it. Where does this come from? That's why I wrote this book, because I want to make it clear where it comes from. It comes from the big boys, and all I mean by the big boys are the relatively small number of mostly, but not only men, who control power and wealth in our country, who have a lot to say about how we do our job, have a lot to say about what public policy gets passed, who not only want to control the story, but they want to get to tell it. They want to say they define what the problems and what the solutions are. We get to disagree if we want, but our voices don't get heard very much because they also control the media and the main messages that get out. And here's their message about women. Pretty much it comes down to this. Women have it made. You can be whatever you want. We got Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. We got Hillary running for president. Harvard has a woman president. We got Condi Rice. We got Katie Couric. I don't know why their names all end in E, but they do. Anyway, we have all those things. And Barbie can be CEO Barbie, Pilot Barbie, President Barbie. What do you know? It's done. Women have it made. And if there aren't a whole lot of women in the best paying or the most powerful jobs, well, that's okay, because they'd rather not be there. They choose to be home with their kids, and that's fine, because motherhood is actually the most important job. Unless you happen to live in poverty, in which case, if you want to stay home with your kids, you are a lazy bum, you are selfish and irresponsible, and you better get yourself a job, and we don't really care how many hours if you never see your kids, because at least they'll have their fun. And if you're a little angry about any of this, who should you be angry at? Each other. Let's have mommy wars. Let's have mothers with kids mad at mothers without kids in the workplace, or women in paid employment mad at women in unpaid employment in the home so that we won't sit back and say, wait a minute, who's profiting from this? Because only the big boys profit from discrimination. And what the big boys say is, if nothing needs to change except you, your deficiencies or choices that you make, certainly we don't need to change. And if we did, you couldn't take us on. Well, yes we can, and yes we have. My book is about why we need to take on the big boys, what feminism means anyway. You know, when people say, are you a feminist? I feel like, would you ask me, do I believe in justice? Would you ask me, do I believe in equality? Well, then why ask me, am I a feminist? Because that's all it means. It means believing in equality and justice, but for everybody, for all women. So I describe this as social justice feminism, meaning yes, we want more women in power, but mainly we want more power in the hands of all women and all people who have been excluded, underrepresented, discriminated against, etc. We want to change, not just in the glass ceiling, we want to redesign the building from the bottom up to benefit women and men. Because when we really value women and work associated with women, we free up everyone's potential. That's my definition of feminism. The big boys, of course, want you to think, you know, I teach women's studies. I taught women's studies. Terry Wolf, are you in this room? I taught women's studies in San Diego, you know, in 1972. And someone named Terry Wolf, who I wish was in this room, who lived in Richmond, Virginia, also was there. And if you asked our students at the time, what do your friends say when you tell them you're taking this new women's studies stuff? They say, oh, feminists, those are hairy, humorless, man-hating dykes. Well, if you ask my students today, what do people say when you tell them you're taking this class? They say feminists are hairy, humorless, man-hating. And lesbians meaning not just women who happen to love someone who happens to be of the same gender, but women who must love each other because they hate men so much they can't even have them as partners in romance. And obviously, those are views that marginalize feminism, that make it seem out of the mainstream, unattractive, unappealing. Who'd want to be there? Because the big boys have controlled that message. I have this little shorthand for how the big boys operate. This is what they do. First of all, they minimize the problem. Just like I said, women have it made. What are you complaining about? Everything is fine. When they talk about all these women and powerful women, I call it abracadabra arithmetic, thinking that one or a few equals plenty. One or a few equals one or a few. It doesn't equal plenty. Secondly, they trivialize. They say things like, oh, you want men to take family leave? They're just going hunting or fishing. They don't really care about their babies. They patronize us. They say, honey, you don't really understand how the marketplace works. They catastrophize. If you pass fill in the blank progressive legislation, business will flee, the sky will fall, and the world as we know it will come to an end. They demonize. Having a little trouble figuring out how to have that job and raise those kids? Well, maybe you just shouldn't have had those kids. And they compartmentalize. They try to set us against each other. What I try to do in taking on the big boys is take a number of issues, mainly based on economic realities, but also some about relationships, and say, what are the myths the big boys put out? What are the realities? What would feminist solutions look like? And why are they a better way to do things, not a favor to women, but a better way to run a business, a country, a family? And how did we take them on, and how can all of you take them on as well? I'm going to give some examples from two chapters, the one on pay and the one on work and family. And then I really want to talk a little bit about activism, a little bit about what to do in the home, and then I want to hear from you. Let's take first the question of pay. Here the big boys focus on trivializing and compartmentalizing. First of all, and they minimize. They say, pay gap is disappearing. It's fine. Women and men are basically making the same. It's really narrowed, or pretty soon it'll be gone altogether. So let's look at the facts. Women overall in the United States make 77 cents on the dollar for men. African American women make 72 cents on the dollar. Latinas make 68 cents on the dollar. Okay, the big boys say, but it's narrowed, it's getting better. Well, here's three facts about the narrowing of the gap. Number one, half of the difference, to the extent that it's narrowed, Half of the difference is from loss of pay among men, particularly men of color. This is not what we had in mind by equality. You don't lower the higher groups, you raise the lower group. Secondly, the gap is greatest for women who work the longest hours and have the highest education. Just the opposite of what you would think. And third, the mommy wage gap is increasing. Mommies make 70% of what men make. Single mothers make 63%. This is not good news. Okay, the big boys say, you know why? It's because women trade income for flexibility. They want to have more flexibility for their families, so they give up the income. Well, here's the problem with that argument. The lowest paying jobs are absolutely the least flexible. Those are the ones where you get fired because you have a sick kid, where you have no flexibility in your schedule, etc. All right, the big boys say, I'll tell you why women make less money. It's because you don't know how to negotiate. You just don't know how to ask. It's another deficiency in your part. Fix that, you'll be fine. Well, there's some truth to this, that women are less assertive about negotiating. Here's the 3 problems with that argument. Number 1, when they do negotiate, they're seen as pushy and aggressive and not rewarded, punished instead. Number 2, how many of you have ever been told on a job that you'll be disciplined if you talk pay with other people? It's very common in many jobs. Most women have no right to negotiate over any condition of their employment, certainly not their pay. And third and most important, why should your pay depend on how slick you are at selling yourself? If you have more skills and experience than I do, fair enough that you make more money. I know what the benchmark is. I know when I reach it, I'll make that money too. But don't say that you make more money because you were better at marketing yourself or because your daddy plays golf with the CEO. Why aren't there fair, transparent, objective criteria for pay? And we all know what they are and we all know how to get there. That's the problem. So I'm going to tell you why women make less money than men. It's a big secret. I happen to know the answer because the best researchers in the entire country got together to figure it out. And they did multiple regression analyses and scientific studies, and here's what they found out. Someone I know was there, she told me. So I'm telling you, so listen up. The reason women make so little money is their employers pay them so little money. And the reason their employers pay them so little money is they can, and often they think they have to in order to compete. And there's a couple of key reasons for this. Have you ever thought about why the most trusted advisors of the president in the United States are called secretary? Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense? It's because that's what secretaries once were. They were the trusted advisor of the person in charge, high status, high paid, virtually all men. In fact, women couldn't do those jobs. And then the Civil War came. Hey, men were gone, they needed women to do a lot of jobs like this. When the government has to create a job category, they have to pass a law. So we have the record of what the congressmen, because there were only men at the time, said. During the Civil War, they said, I know many practically educated and industrious women who would do just fine being a clerk, librarian of Congress, teller, etc. Jobs that women had been excluded from before, and we could pay them half to 2/3 as much. Why is that? Why was it legal and culturally acceptable at the time to pay women half to 2/3 as much? Because it was expected that they had a man to take care of them, either their father or their husband, or they better get one. Forget that there were significant sections of our population that this was never true of, particularly immigrant women and former slaves. But nevertheless, this was generally accepted. So guess what happened? They hired the women at this cheaper rate, and they did just fine, thank you very much. So they hired more women, and then more women, and these jobs became what we now think of as female-dominated jobs at the discriminatory rate. By 1963, when the Equal Pay Act was passed that said women and men doing the same job for the same company had to get the same pay, most women and men no longer did the same jobs, and the jobs women did paid less just because women did them. The legacy of discrimination is embedded in the market rate of those jobs. And the other way that happens is when you do for a living what women do in the home, that work is totally undervalued because in the home it's unpaid. This is why the people who take care of small children earn less than the people who take care of our cars, our pets, our lawns, etc. It's not because it isn't important and isn't skilled, it's because it's women's work that's undervalued. And there's a lot of other reasons that I talk about in the book why those women make less money, having to do with lack of equity for part-timers and lack of bargaining power and racism. And here's what we need. First of all, we need to revalue women's work. We need to remove that legacy of discrimination, whether it's based on gender or based on race or any other criteria. And we know how to do it. There exists such a thing as unbiased job evaluations, as opposed to the ones that many of our jobs have been evaluated by. Okay, so we fought for this in Wisconsin. And what the big boys did was they said, this is the most ridiculous thing we ever heard of. They want to compare nurses with plumbers and nurses with electricians. Who ever heard of such a ridiculous thing? They also tried to compartmentalize it. They said to the private sector workers, you don't want these state workers to get more money. They already make more money than you. Forget them. So 9 to 5 had members who came out and said, here's what I do in my job. Here's all the skills. Here's all the decision making I have to do. Here's all the things that are dependent on what I do. And here's how little money I make. And by the way, here are all the public assistance programs I'm eligible for. Food stamps, child care assistance, housing assistance. The one I'm not eligible for that I desperately need is health care. And you bet I want the state to be a model employer, because I want my employer to see that and say, oh, maybe that's the way we need to go. We won. We won pay equity for state employees in Wisconsin. And after we won, the law firm that was the main opponent of our bill had a big conference, all the executives in Milwaukee, and they invited me to speak. And I thought, well, this is odd. Why would they invite me to speak? They know I'm for it. They were against it. And then I figured it out. They wanted to know what we were going to do next. They wanted to know if we were going to organize to bring this to the private sector. And I thought, you know, it's only fair. I'm going to tell them. So I went to this meeting, big hotel, big fancy suits, and I said, I know why you invited me. I know it's because you want to know our game plan, and I think it's only fair that I share it with you, even though they didn't pay me a dime. I said, but I have to give you a little background. So here's what happened. I happened to be in Madison the day that the Democratic caucus debated whether or not to support the bill. And there was an old UAW member from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, named Joe Luby, who stood up and said, I have been opposed to pay equity, and I've changed my mind, and I want to tell you why, because I think it's really instructive, and I think we should all support it. So recently I had to have surgery in the lower abdominal area. Did you know when you have surgery you have to get shaved, and you have to get prepped? Well, you know how they're always comparing nurses and plumbers and nurses and electricians? In comes the electrician with a big old tool belt, and in came the nurse with a nice, neat little kit. And I said, oh God, please let it be her that's going to do the prep. And please, whatever he's making, let her be making the same. It was the nurse who did it. The prep went fine. The surgery went fine. The doctor comes to see him. Luby, how you doing? Great. How's everything working? And Luby said, well, not everything. And the doctor said, well, you know, you can't go home till everything is working. And sure enough, in comes the plumber with the roto-rooter, and in comes the nurse with a nice, neat little kit. And he said, please let it be her, and whatever he's making, please let her make the same. It was her. He did fine, and that's why I'm for pay equity, he said. And he sits down. And another state legislator from Wisconsin Rapids gets up and he says, let me tell you what really happened. Luby goes in for surgery. He goes to get prepped. In comes the nurse with a straight-edged razor. She holds it over the affected area and she says, hey Luby, are you for pay equity? That's our plan, I said. We're organizing the operating of nurses. We're getting the schedule of all senior executives who have operations. We're handing out straight-edge razors. We're training them to say, hey, so-and-so, are you for pay equity? We call it use it or lose it. It starts tomorrow. Get ready. And as a result, the thing one of my most proud moments was the business editor of the paper wrote up the next day and described me as moving, witty, and sometimes bawdy. And that's what it is. Okay, let me talk a little bit about work family. Here the big boys don't trivialize it. What they say is, everybody already has it. Companies already are family friendly. We don't need to do anything by law. That would be a disaster. So let's tell you a few facts. There are 167 countries, 163 of them have paid leave. We don't, along with Swaziland, Liberia, and Papua New Guinea. We have a Family Medical Leave Act. You can have up to 12 weeks unpaid leave for birth or adoption or foster care for a seriously ill child, spouse, or elderly parent. Here's the problem. It was a great first step. Half the workforce isn't covered by it. The definition of family is very narrow. It doesn't include same-sex partners or siblings or in-laws or grandparents. It doesn't cover routine illness. Thank God most kids don't get leukemia, but they do all get pink eye, strep throat, colds, flus. That's not covered. And it's unpaid. Every year, there are 2 to 3 million people who are allowed to take this leave who can't because they can't afford it. And in terms of routine illness, paid sick days, half the workforce, including 3/4 of low-wage workers, and 7 out of 8 of the people who serve you your food in restaurants have no paid sick days. That means that the person who serves you your soup may have just sneezed into it or had the flu and been told, if you go home, and believe me, I know many of these people personally, you will be fired. We can do better than this as a nation. When I was pregnant with my first son, a good friend of mine who lives in France in 1977 wrote me a letter and said, I feel so sorry for you that you have to have this baby in the United States. I was shocked. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for us. I want us to live up to the potential we have as a nation. And that's why we need to say no more and having family values end at the workplace door. If we value families, then we have to value them at work with family leave insurance and with paid sick days and various other programs that allow people to be good employees and good family members. That's what everybody wants. In Wisconsin, when we fought for a state law, this was just for unpaid family leave, the governor at the time said that he would sign only a bill for maternity leave and only for 30 days. We knew it wasn't long enough, and we knew we had to have the principle that having a family shouldn't cost you your job. We had to include family leave. And so we thought, how can we demonstrate this to the legislators? And we decided to bring kids to the state capitol. So we have a very broad coalition. That's what's really exciting. These coalitions are everyone from school nurses to the labor unions to the AARP to progressive employers to the Alzheimer's Association, people who work with chronic disease, et cetera, et cetera. Among us, we had a bunch of kids who had issues. So, for example, our delegation included a boy named Noah who was 9. When he was 5, he had cancer. And he described getting these shots, which he remembered being needles this big. I doubt that they really were. And he had one parent hold him and one parent tell him the story. And he said he could never have gotten those needles if he didn't have both of his parents there. No one knew that there were a lot of kids in that hospital who had nobody there. What he didn't know when he was 5, that he now knew at 9, was their parents couldn't get off work or they'd lose their jobs and their health insurance. And we had a kid who got adopted for the first time at the age of 12, and he was like thrilled to have a family, except his new mom had to put them to bed at 8 because the adoption agency required her to be home during the day, and her work wouldn't give her leave, so she had to work evenings. And he said it was really hard getting to know his new siblings when they went to bed at 8. And there was someone who lost a grandparent, and someone who had a brother with asthma, and someone who had a sister with developmental disabled, and so on and so on. And my younger son, whose birthday is today, who was 7, and the youngest and smallest child there, who thank God is fine, but was hit by a car when he was 5, and had to spend the night in the hospital, which to him meant 2 days. And he said he could not have done it if his parents hadn't been there. In fact, he said it like this. And I just want to ask the governor, how would you feel if your kid got sick and you couldn't be there with your sick? So they didn't want to meet with the governor. He delegated it to the Secretary of Employment Relations, who met with the kids around this big polished wood table. And all the kids had told us their stories, and we had typed it up, so they had to read if they wanted to, or they could just talk. By the end of it, the guy that met with them had a tear in his eye and a grin on his face, because they were very moving, but they were really funny and cute. And at the end of it, the secretary said, you know, we're so used to meeting with lobbyists, we forget about the people that are actually affected by the bills that we pass. Just as he forgot that I was sitting there writing down every word that he said. So I said, okay, so does anybody have any questions? And my son Craig raised his hand. He said, yeah, I want to ask the governor, why wouldn't the governor sign this bill? And Secretary Trees said, I promise you that the governor will sign some version of this bill. So we immediately held a press conference. All the kids told their stories again. We read the statement and said, Secretary Trees assured us that the governor would sign the bill. Headlines the next day, children lobbyists win lawmakers' hearts. Secretary Trees said, oh. And the governor did sign the bill. Just 2 weeks for family leave, but still it was a start. And I took Craig to the bill signing. And the governor acknowledged him. And he said it was because of the kids that the legislature passed it and he was going to sign it. And then he offered Craig his pen. And Craig gives me the look that says, I know this is a bad guy, Mom, but I want that pen. We still have this pen to this day. I tell you this story because I just want to give you a vision of what the world could look like. And I tell you it because I know it. I didn't make it up. It's not pie in the sky. I know some companies that already look like this in the United States, and I know many countries where parts of what I'm about to tell you are true. So just imagine that this was your future, that you were in a couple, and whether it was opposite sex or same sex, both of you could share up to a year's leave for a new baby, whether you birthed that baby or adopted that baby. And after a year, there was really high quality child care that was absolutely affordable because it was on a sliding scale. And your baby would start going 10 hours a week and then keep increasing, but only to say 25 or 30 eventually. Preschool, by the way, would be completely free, as it is in many countries, 2.5 minutes. And you and the partner would go back to work 20 hours a week, 25, up to a maximum of, say, 30, because that would be a full-time week. You'd have universal health insurance, so you wouldn't have to worry about your benefits. There would be equity for part-timers, so you wouldn't have to worry. And advancement would be based not on whether you had a wife at home and could spend 80 hours at work, not on whether you could move, meet, or travel at a moment's notice, which pretty much means you have to have a wife at home or no life, but rather on your skill, your talent, your ability to motivate, and your ability to work and play well with others. Your ability to share rather than to hoard information. That's how people got promoted, and there would be much less hierarchy and much more collaboration. You know what we'd have? We'd have better products, better services, fewer wars, a lot less debt, instead of having tainted toys and Enron and $18 billion in tax cuts for the oil companies. We figured out how much it would cost. Two friends of mine actually figured this out. All those things I just said, 1.5% of gross domestic product. You know how we could pay for that? If we just stopped welfare for the big boys, the 18 billion tax cuts for the oil companies, the 2 million we give McDonald's to market McNuggets in China, the $34 million in tax breaks that Enron got right before they went under. If we just stopped that, we spend 5 times that amount, 7.5% of the gross domestic product, on subsidizing the big boys. We have plenty of money. This isn't about money, it's about political will, and we can make the difference in where that political will goes. So let me just end by talking a little bit about activism. You know, I had a student who wrote an essay, and she said, I don't know if I can call myself a feminist because I haven't been an activist. But here's 3 things I did do this semester. And she described helping a friend leave an abusive relationship, standing up to a doctor who told her, don't worry about that lump in your breast because you're so young, and standing up to a teacher who made a racist comment to her kid. I said, you bet you're an activist. This is what it means to find your voice and to use it. But in order to do it most effectively, we have to do it as part of organizations. I have this little shorthand in my book, I call it DREAM, dare to imagine the world we deserve, and don't settle for anything less, even if we have to get there step by step. R means reach out and take somebody with you on the journey to do this. E is educate yourself, and I have lots of resources in my book, and I don't have half of them. A is act, and I have pages and pages of things that you could do, even if you don't have any time and little or no money. But M is the most important, multiply, because we will be most effective if we do this as part of organizations, and organizations that work together as part of a movement for long-term and really systemic change. And my final thought for you before I open up to questions is, what does this mean for work in the home? So I'd just like you to join me in repeating after me. Housework, is work to be done, by those who live in the house. It's not mom's work that others do or don't help her with. It's everybody's work, and I have lots of examples in the book of how to do this. So I just want to tell you about a story. In my family, in 1983, a year after we started the 9 to 5 chapter in Milwaukee, a very conservative woman wrote an op-ed saying all problems in the family, from teenage suicide to alcoholism, are because of mothers who work outside the home. So they wanted her to debate me, but she would only go on if her husband went on. So they wanted to know if my husband would go on. We said, sure. The live show Thursday night, 7 o'clock. So we had to get a babysitter. So we're waiting for the babysitter, and my kids were 5 and 2. The 5-year-old, Nat, said, Mom, how come there aren't any boy babysitters? And I said, well, you know, there are boy babysitters, and you can be a babysitter when you get older. But you're right, most babysitters are girls, because most families aren't like our family. Most dads don't really get to share taking care of their kids. And Nat said, that's what you and Daddy are going to talk about tonight on that show. And I thought, 5-year-old is so advanced. So we go to the show. She and I are just at it immediately. The men don't even get to talk. Larry gets to say one thing. And what he said was, men should be so grateful to the women's movement because they've given us parenting. And even though it's a huge responsibility, it's such a joy, and we should just say thanks. We go home, can't wait to see what the kids thought. Well, it turned out that Greatest American Hero was on at the same time, and that's what they watched. But that's what we watched it during the commercials, which apparently there are many of. And I said, okay, of all the stuff you saw, what was your favorite part? Hoping that he had gotten to see Larry saying that. And he said, at the end, when the words go over your faces, that was really cool. So, okay, maybe at 5, he wasn't entirely advanced, but at 8. And I'll leave you with this thought. I come home one day, you know, here he is playing with his Star Wars figures, and I just screamed at him for nothing. And I said, I am so sorry, honey. I had a terrible day, and I didn't mean to take it out on you. I'm really sorry. And he looks up at me and said, that's okay, Mom. Just don't take it out on yourself either. We got a lot of work to do, and some of it's going to be challenging, and it's not always going to be simple. And not everyone we love will always agree with us. And so here's the thing I want you to remember. I hear so many people, especially women, saying, I'm so stupid, or why did I forget this, or I can't. Every time you hear that voice in your head, say, if my best friend said this, and what goes along with that is, I'm so ugly, I'm so fat, I'm so fill in the blank. If your best friend said that, what would you say to her? You would say, no, you're not, you're so busy, you're doing so many things, you're so talented. Be your own best friend. Always remember to say that to yourself. Because together we can do this. We can not just shatter the glass ceiling, but we can redesign the building to benefit all of us. Thank you so much.